called. He somehow called my father and mother's number, and asked for me. And my dad called me in my apartment and said, "This guy Mick Jones wants to talk to you." I says, "Mick Jones?" He says, "Yeah, I don't know who it is." He says, "Mick Jones. He's got an English accent. He's from New York." He says he wants to talk to you. So I called him back, and he told me he wasn't with Spooky Tooth anymore, that he was putting his own band together, and he happened to hear one of the Black Sheep albums and liked the way I sang, and asked me if I would. He said, "Would you come down if we fly you down and put you up in a hotel? Would you come down and audition?" And I says, "Well, I says I would like to, Mick. I says, but I have to finish up business with Black Sheep. You know, we've got to figure out if we're going to try to continue or that's it." And he says, "Well," he says, "I'll call you back in a couple of weeks." I says, "Okay, good." So the next time the guys in Black Sheep and I got together, we get together once or twice a week just to see if we could do anything, or Yeah. And so I told them about the call, and they said, "Well, what did you tell them?" I said I told them that I wouldn't come down because I'm already in a band, and they said, "Lou, we sit here and we talk about what if and what if." They said, we all sit here and we know that this band is over. You've got an opportunity to do something, and maybe something really great. He said, why don't you take him up on his offer and go see what you can do in New York?
Fantastic, and very magnanimous from the rest of your bandmates as well to allow that to happen. So just in terms of meeting up with Mick and the rest of the band then, what were your first impressions of him and playing with him and the rest of the band? What was your feeling immediately from doing that?
Well, I liked them. They were all very friendly guys, and you could tell that there's a lot of camaraderie between them. Now, Foreigner, as we know it, wasn't completely together yet. Dennis wasn't in the band. And there was a different bass player too. So when we started writing, Mick and I started writing the day I auditioned. He told me he liked the way I sang and stuff, and he says, "You want to come over for supper tonight?" He says, "Let's start writing some songs." So I went over his house. We wrote that night. The first night we got together, we wrote "Long, Long Way from Home."
Oh wow!
Yep, that's a good sign, isn't
it? Yeah, very good.
And so we would continue to do that every other night. And pretty soon we had about 5 or 6 songs. And Bud Prager, our manager, had the penthouse suite on top of a 20-story building in Manhattan. So he had all the offices around the outside, and the inside was just an empty space. And that's where we rehearsed. And after we worked up those 5 or 6 songs, we started. Our manager started putting the word out that we are a band, and we're looking for a record deal. And he sent out the rough tapes of our songs, and a little at a time. The record labels called our manager and came to see us rehearse. They wanted to see what we sounded like live. And I think there were about seven record companies that came and heard us. And they all passed on us.
Wow.
Yep. They all passed on us. And then Atlantic came. And Jerry Greenberg was the president at that time. And John Kolodna was the head of A&R, and so we played them some songs, and they had the demo of the songs, and they thanked us and they left, and we kind of looked at each other and we go, well, I don't think that's going to happen either. And then John Kolodner, about 15 minutes later, came back, and he says, I really want to talk to you guys. He says, I think your songs are great. He says, right down the line, every one of them is different from the other. They have a great style, a great cohesiveness. and they've got a uniqueness about them that is missing from a lot of bands that are out there today.
Mm-hmm.
He says the problem is the demos and the songs you played live for us and probably everybody else averaged about between 6.5 and 8.5 minutes. He goes, you could never get that played on the radio. If he says, let's get about 4 of the songs and trim them down to 3 minutes and 15, 3.5 minutes. So we'll cut out some fat and we'll condense them into a very potent powerhouse songs. He says, and then let's have Jerry Greenberg back. And we're like, okay. So you know, all the big long overture songs that we were playing, you know, had 5 or 6 verses to them. You know, he cut it out, and we ended up having 2 or 3 verses and a guitar solo, and the song was over. You know, nothing was over 3.5 minutes, and that's just what FM and hit radio wanted. They didn't want anything over 3.5 minutes. They would either fade the song out in the middle, or they would not play it. And so, once we played the edited versions of the songs again for Jerry Greenberg, and he loved the other songs. He just didn't know what to do with them because they were too long. So he had a contract with them that day.
Oh, wow.
So he pulled out the contract, and Bud Prager, our manager, called his attorney, and we did business that day. We signed a deal.
No.
And within 2 weeks, we were in the studio recording. Atlantic Records had their own studio on Columbus Circle in New York City. And as we were going in to record at Atlantic Studios, Aretha Franklin was coming out. She had just finished her album.
Wow.
So she left some good vibes.
I bet, indeed. And some sprinkled stardust as well on that first album, because it became an absolute global sensation, didn't it? It brought you guys such attention. And what did you feel then? Because obviously you had success with Black Sheep in terms of the 2 records and touring with Kiss, and then you mentioned Make the Spooky Tooth and things like that. But this kind of took both of you onto a different level, didn't it?
It certainly did. Right from the get-go, it did. We could feel the impact of a real serious label behind us in their promotion department, in their distribution department. Their people were knocking on radio station doors and coming in with press photos and this and that, and the history of the people in the band, and then he would have like a 3 single EP.
Yep.
You know, and so the first 3 songs that got recorded were mixed and mastered right away and put on the EP, so he could start playing them for radio stations. And there they were. It was Feels Like the First Time, Cold as Ice, and I think the third one was Long, Long Way from Home. Three really good songs. Yes. And seriously, I think 95% of the places that they brought the album immediately added it to their heavy rotation. And we were on our way.
Absolutely, on your way indeed. And just in terms of the songwriting then, just to go back to what you were saying about John Kolodner and trimming the fat and keeping it to radio friendly, is that something that you guys kept in mind for later in your career? So when you're writing songs for the next few years, or was that just for that first album?
No, always. We always kept that in mind. We would mention John, you know, and a lot of times he'd come in because he was with Atlantic Records for another 3 or 4 more, I think 3 or 4 albums more before he left for Geffen. And he would pop in from time to time, you know, and we'd play him a song, and the song's playing and he's listening, and I'd see him look at his watch, you know, and the song ended, and I'd look at John, I go, "How do we do, John?" And It's like this.
Fantastic stuff indeed. Just skipping on a couple of years, obviously into 1981, and an album that became absolutely massive again worldwide, the fourth album. And you talking about some huge songs on there, Jukebox Hero and Waiting for a Girl Like You and all them sort of stuff. The album was #1 in America for something like 10 weeks. And at that stage, though, Ian and Al had left before that. I mean, was it a worry when those guys had left the band, or was it something you kind of just knew that you were going to carry on and things were still going to be a success?
Well, the Head Games album had really good songs on it, and we thought we had the right producer in Roy Thomas, but he seemed very distracted, like his mind was someplace else. I think he had another album lined up to produce, and we didn't feel he was completely with us in our work, and we expected the Roy Thomas Baker sound and everything that would have went real good with the music we had. We also thought that he was going to help us finish some songs. We had great ideas on about 4, maybe 5 songs, and we didn't have time to completely finish them because we had to get in the studio. So when it came time to work on those songs, we were playing the songs and playing demos and stuff like that, waiting for Roy to say, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you end it like this? And he would just sit there. And he'd be like this, and Roy, what do you think? Yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, it needs a little something here. Any ideas? No, you guys take care of that, And needless to say, we were disappointed, and the clock was ticking because we had to get the album out. So we finished the album, but I would say there's about 3 songs that could have been a lot better than what they were, but we just didn't have time to finish them. We ran out of time, and we ran out of our budget. So we released the album, and it did well, but it did less than half of what Double Vision did. Mm-hmm. It didn't get good reviews, and because the album cover was a little suggestive. And the first single was Dirty White Boy. And the second single was Head Games. There started to be quite a few rock radio stations that refused to play it. And we were in my local paper in Rochester, there was a huge picture on the front cover, showing a big bonfire and people throwing their Foreigner albums in it. We were stunned, and they were saying that our songs and our visual presentation of the cover was hideous and suggestive, particularly to younger teens and stuff like that. And what's the big station in Boston? Is it I can't remember what it is, but MMR in Cleveland, a lot of big stations in NEW in New York, they banned us. We got no airplay on a lot of the big stations, and the album, after 2 singles, the record company called us in and said, we're up against a brick wall. We can't spend good money to get no results. Let's just pull back and work on another album. So we did, but the ideas we had for the new album were pretty different from what we had made to that point. And although the guys were good players, a lot of them were good in the one vein that we had been playing in. And when we tried to write new songs and kind of change our direction a little bit, they were still playing the same things they played for the last 6 years. And we couldn't get them to, I don't know if to open their mind or, let their creativity take over. And Mick and I would after writing sessions and rehearsals and stuff, we would just meet and have a couple of drinks and talk about what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We can't afford to have another album like Head Games, or we'll be looking for a label too, you know. So after you know, we just decided to make that move, and we let I believe we let, trying to think who we let go.
It was Ian and Al, I think it was.
Ian and Al, yes, that's right. And that was one of the worst moments of my life, because they were good friends and very good players, and they didn't see it coming either. But
So
we did try. We tried to encourage.
Yeah, I can imagine that
To
in terms of
encourage them
to open their minds as well and go forward. In terms of that discussion, was that something you did face to face? Was it a sit down conversation? Because that sounds like it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it was very difficult to do, and we, you know, we were trying our best to tell them how we felt and what we needed, and they couldn't deliver. They would come up with things that almost sounded like 2 albums ago. So we were trying to move away from that, you know, keeping our foreigner sensibilities, but shifting the music to a different path, and they just couldn't follow us.
And then just moving on to your solo stuff then, because I think it was in about 1990, wasn't it? You decided to leave Foreigner. You'd had solo record out before that. I mean, what was it that prompted your decision at that point to decide that it was time for you to go solo and to do your own thing?
Well, it was a couple of things. It was mostly because I didn't like the direction that the band had been going for the last couple of albums. Mick seemed to be incredibly enamored with all the new keyboards that had been coming out, and he heard all the great keyboard players, the rock keyboard players, using new sounds and stuff like that, and he went out and bought all the modern new keyboards and would stay up nights playing with the sounds. And thereby, the songs he wrote were keyboard songs, and we would learn them, and I would sing them, and this and that, and at the 11th hour, he would put a little guitar part on it, you know. But most of the album was based around keyboards, and I told him face to face. I says, we're going to lose our rock audience. He says, because although this has a rock beat and such and such, you know, being a keyboard song does not sit well with fans who began following Foreigner as a guitar-driven rock band. Not only do they not care for the keyboards, but a lot of the keyboard songs were ballads. After we had the hit with Waiting for a Girl Like You, next album was I Want to Know What Love Is. Next album after that was I Don't Want to Live Without You. And those albums were laced with ballads or mid-tempo songs that could pass for ballads. And I started to dislike being involved in the band. You know, we would do live shows, and we would start out with the first, second, and third albums and have the place rocking, and 3/4 of the way through the set, they'd be falling asleep, or you could sense the restlessness because they just weren't that interested, even though the songs were modest hits. That's not what the crowd came for. Yeah. And after one of the tours, Mick decided to take a break. He was frazzled. So he and his wife went for a worldwide cruise. It took over 6 months.
Wow.
Okay. And I can remember Dennis saying, you know, we should be working on a new album. What are we supposed to do while you take the cruise? And he says, relax. He says, just relax and enjoy yourselves. And I'm thinking to myself, I am going to enjoy myself. And all the songs that I had started to write or had written already, saving them up for a rainy day. And I'll give you an example. My bass player, Bruce Turgan, also played really good rhythm guitar. And he helped me with the chords on Midnight Blue to get them to sound as good as they did. And while I had that earmarked for my solo album, Foreigner was getting ready to do an album. And I asked Bruce to come in with me. That's before Bruce was the bass player in Foreigner. I asked him to come in with me and help me play that song for Mick as an idea for the new album. So he had his acoustic guitar, he played the chords, and I sang a verse and a chorus, and the rest of the guys in the band are going like this, and Mick's going, oh, he goes, pretty good. He goes, let me see the guitar. And so Bruce gave him the guitar, and he tried to figure out the chords and the voicings. And you could see he was getting frustrated. And Bruce took the guitar and showed him the fingering and stuff like that. That didn't help the situation. That got him enraged. Somebody was showing him. And he goes, well, he says, it's pretty good. He says, let's forget that though. And I'm thinking to myself, let's forget that. And I says, okay. And so after whatever the Foreigner album was that came out after that's when he took his cruise. And I had enough songs to do my own album. And I went to Atlantic with demos and told them that I wanted to do my own album. Mick was going to be gone for almost a year. I wanted to do my own album. These are the songs I plan on recording. Can you give me a budget and let me get started? And they did. And I did. And my album came out, and I was opening for Steve Miller on a tour.
Yep.
Okay. After about the third week that I was on tour with Steve, after my set, I was in the dressing room, and somebody said, Lou, telephone call for you. And it was Mick. He goes, Lou, how's things? I says, things are great, Mick. How was your voyage? He says, it was great. He says, it was really, really restful. It did a lot. He says, but I'm all nerved up again. I says, why? He says, as soon as I go, he says, you go out and do your own thing. I says, I'm still a member of Foreigner. I says, I didn't want to sit around doing nothing. I had songs. I wanted to do them in a way that I saw fit and release them on Atlantic, our label, so that I, as a songwriter and an artist, could grow outside of Foreigner. I says, is that wrong? And he wouldn't answer me. He says, well, if you want to be a part of this band, you better drop your part of the tour and come back. We're starting to record. So I did. And that was the album that I had little to no input in as a songwriter. That wasn't Agent Provocateur. That was inside information. If you look on the credits of the album, I think I'm in on about 2 or 3 out of 10 songs.
So obviously you had some huge hits on your own steam, the likes of Midnight Blue, as you mentioned, and just between you and me, both top 10 hits in America. I mean, you've been part of a big band for such a long time. So how was it having these hits under your own steam, under your own name then?
Very satisfying. Very satisfying. And I co-produced those too. And was a co-writer too. And it felt just awesome to be able to do what I knew I could do for so many years and not having the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure Atlantic gave me the support that I thought they should have.
Okay.
Because as soon as Midnight Blue broke into the top 5, I had friends in Atlantic Records, the offices there, and one of them called me and he says, I'm saying this under anonymity. He said, Mick just had a big meeting with Ahmet Ertegun. That's the chairman of Warner's, and the gist of the meeting was that if Lou's solo album reaches a very popular stage, he'll never come back to Foreigner. That's what Mick told Ahmet. So suddenly, after Midnight Blue, the next song that came out was I can't remember what it was, but it was Ready or Not. It was the title track, and it did okay. And then the third single disappeared after 2 weeks. They didn't promote it. They didn't promote it because Mick told them that he was sure I would come back to the band if the album didn't do well. But if it did really good, then I'd be gone forever. So after a big promotion on for Midnight Blue, suddenly there was less and less and less. And in 1997, I called Atlantic Records. I just wanted to see what the sales numbers were for the Ready or Not album. And they said it was 991,000 copies. Okay, so I was 9,000 away from being platinum.
Yeah.
10 years later, I called again. It was 996,000. So in 10 years, it sold 5,000. And I said, I'm getting a pile of shit here. This is not right. So I didn't look anymore. I didn't ask anymore. I knew that I wasn't getting the truth from anybody.
That's incredibly difficult. So obviously you've spoken about being with Mick and things like that. I mean, how are things between the two of you in recent years? Have you spoken in the last few years at all, or has it been completely silence between you two for a long time?
It was silence after I left the band, and then when we got into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, when I saw him and he saw me, we hugged each other and so good to see you. It's been a long time. Blah 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 blah. We had lunch, stuff like that, and then we, at the performance, we congratulated each other and this and that, and we performed a couple songs on stage with a backup group, and everything was nice. Then all the Atlantic people were there, and we went over and took pictures with everybody from the office and all that stuff. It was all smiles and hugs and everything. And after that night, never heard from him again. Never heard from him again.
So it'd be interesting to see what happens if you do get into the Rock Hall and how all that goes down again and between everybody.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'll be friendly and cordial, but I'm not going to be like I found my long lost brother or anything,
That's a shame. I mean, obviously you guys have had such success together. You shared such a long time together, and everything that goes on with being in a band and being so close and under each other's feet for such a long time. That must be difficult looking back on all that and thinking how things were.
It's very difficult because we worked our tails off together, writing most of those songs and I think we were the focal part of the band too. So the live show was very important and stuff. And I thought we had a very good friendship during most of those years, But after that, I Want to Know What Love thing happened. It was different. We barely spoke to each other on tour, even. Now, I knew that what he did to me, he was wrong and he was dishonest, and he made a fortune and I made nothing. And got no credit from my peers or anybody. It's that Mick Jones magic touch. Look, he did it again. I Want to Know What Love Is.